All right, remember, whenever you're ready, you can get started.
All right. Well, welcome to tonight's talk. I'm Ramon Arancibia, horticulture specialist in West Central region. So thank you, Sarah, for inviting me to this talk. I hope you enjoy it. We're going to talk about mainly, high tunnels and greenhouses, but what we call all this is protected culture. And protected culture include tunnels, greenhouses, and other structures that we're going to see around in a few minutes. But mainly, as you see in this picture, most of backyard gardeners and even some growers, commercial growers, do use is high tunnels and low tunnels, as you can see in that picture. And essentially, the difference between a high tunnel and a greenhouse is that the high tunnel does not have any power. So there is no light or heater or anything. You can put something like that in it, but it would become more like a greenhouse. Yeah, so that's the definition of high tunnel is without power. And those low tunnels that you see there can be with a plastic film as well as with screens or what is called a row cover, which is a porous fabric that we're going to talk a little bit later about. But this is what we're going to discuss tonight is a protected culture that includes a few things like high tunnels, low tunnels, and other structure. And I wanted to let you know that this is nothing new. What is not even the use of plastic is not that new. I mean, there are several decades that we've been using plastic, and that's why it has become more commercial, more available for everybody. But protected culture has been for a long time, more than 100 years or 200 years around. If you think of all those glass houses that were built in the 1500 in Europe, those are greenhouses which include protected culture. And they were mainly built to keep warm season plants or trees that were brought from the tropics to the cold areas. So conservatories and glass houses are the old type, and in Europe since the 1600s. Then it became more commercial in the 1800s in the United States and Europe because you can grow or you can extend the growing season and get crops earlier or later earlier in the spring or later in the fall. And finally, it became useful for the homeowner and commercially. And if you get the opportunity to go to Virginia, go to Colonial Williamsburg, and you see how were they doing in the 1800s. And we're going to show a few pictures of there, but there is a book that you can find in the internet about Colonial Williamsburg, how they did horticulture at that time. And there are some examples there, terracotta clay that will be used to cover a plant when it's cold. And so protected culture in general is a technology that protects plants or crops against biotics and abiotic stresses. What do I mean by biotic? Is usually something living like insects, for example. And abiotic would be environmental, physical stresses, environmental stresses, temperature, wind, excess of solar radiation, things like that. So as I mentioned, abiotic, it would be the modification of the environment to improve growing conditions. This means temperature, wind, relative humidity, solar radiation, rain, etc. Those things, there are many things that a tunnel can protect the plant from. When you close it and you keep the temperature higher than outside, of course, you can extend the growing season. And that's why most of the people use it for, but they don't realize that there are other benefits by using these tunnels. So by many of these other conditions, modification of these other conditions, it's eventually enhance the crop growth and yield. So it reduced the conditions favorable for diseases. That's another thing that you have to keep in consideration. If you grow in a high tunnel and you're protecting the plants from rain, you're reducing certain diseases. Not all diseases, but the most important ones are reduced. So we try to avoid a leaf wetness that would promote foliage diseases. Antibiotics is a physical barrier to mainly insects. And in the case of mulch, for example, which is part of the protected culture, it protects against weeds. Uh, it will reduce diseases. When you protect against insects, certain insects transmit certain diseases, viral diseases mainly. So when you protect the plant against insects, particularly the small insects that transmit viruses, you're also protecting the plant against these viral diseases. So we're going to talk a little bit about covering materials. Essentially, you're going to see in the old time, in William, in the 1800s, they were using wax papers and textile to cover the tunnels. Nowadays, it's more commonly used spunbonded fabric, which is a porous fabric, plastic, of course, but it's porous, of various thicknesses. So the thicker it is, the more protection against cold temperature. It can be used as over a tunnel, as a low tunnel, or as a floating blanket. And we're going to see some pictures about that. And as I mentioned, as a low tunnel too. In the old time, plastic film were used in low tunnels. Nowadays, it's not commonly used in low tunnels, but it's still very useful in high tunnels, particularly because the film is not porous, so it protects against rain. In greenhouses nowadays, they're using polycarbonate panels that would, there are single wall walls as well as twin walls, where the twin wall is more efficient to protect against cold temperatures. It is better insulated. And we also have nets and screens of various mesh. The mesh is, depending on the mesh, is the size of the hole on the mesh. When the mesh is higher, the hole is smaller. So that's when you have to figure it out. A small mesh is a big hole, larger insects are going to get in. Higher mesh is a smaller hole, smaller insects are going to get out of your crops. And there are some very, very, very fine mesh plastic nettings that are specialized for those insects that are small, like aphids, whiteflies, and thrips, that are the ones that transmit viruses. They're very small, very fine mesh, very fine netting. And also in the old time, they were using glasses. Nowadays, it's pretty expensive to use glasses for a greenhouse. So usually commercial greenhouses do not use glass anymore. The availability of those polycarbonate panels is much more efficient in not only keeping the temperature, but they're not as fragile or they don't break as easily as glass. So they're more efficient to use the polycarbonate panels. There are some panels that are not polycarbonate, they're plastic, hard plastic, and they're very well useful too. In relation to structures, we are going to talk a little bit about hot caps and hot or cold frames that a lot of people use in the backyard, and the old time were used also. Low tunnels and row covers, we're going to talk more about those. High tunnels, as I mentioned before, do not have power. So there are passive greenhouse or passive ventilation of the greenhouse. It can be used as a rain shelter when they're open on the sides, or you can use them as a net houses when you use a net or screens. Yeah. And it can be used as shade houses when these screens or nettings are black or white, so they reflect the light. And of course, green or glass houses are highly or actively maintained or actively highly managed, managing the environment. Of course, you manage the conditions inside the glass house. And for that, these ones would have to have a heater and air movement fans for air movement. And when it gets hot, exhaust fans to get the hot air out of the greenhouses. So you have an active management of the environment. And of course, we have the more the technological indoor production of plants, which is completely managed environment. You control the light, you control the temperature, the humidity, everything is under control in big, large warehouses. They don't use sunlight because it's more difficult to manage the sunlight, so they use LED light mainly. Mm-hmm. Some people might use a little bit because it's indoor. When you use the sunlight, it becomes more like a greenhouse. But indoor production it does not use the sunlight. It uses LED lights mainly. Here are examples. If you go to Williamsburg, Colonial Williamsburg, this is what you're going to see, like in the old time. This top picture is not from that time. These are plastic cups that you can use to protect individual plants. But in the old time, they were using these glass cups to protect plants. And you can see that in Williamsburg, Colonial Williamsburg. And you see the lady there in the Colonial Williamsburg dressing as in the old time, during colonial time. And at that time, they were already using these hot or cold frames covered with glass mainly, but they can open it. And sometimes they would put a little fire or something, a candle inside to keep it a little warmer than what is would be outside. But these cold frames are usually good to early in the spring to produce transplant or to grow very small plants or short plants, let's say lettuce or things like that, but they don't grow large, so they cannot come out of the structure, the cold or hot frames. But mainly are to grow the transplant early in the season and then go to plant them outside. So now, even nowadays, are a lot of these structures are still used by gardeners. You can have your own, or you can even you can find, and you might be able to build it, or you might be able to buy one in the internet. But that's the purpose of these hot and cold frames. It could be with a heater or without heater, mainly for transplant and small crops. Other protective structure, you saw that pictures already. We're talking about the high tunnels and the low tunnels. Yeah. You can have some, you can find in the internet, you can buy certain garden greenhouses. I wouldn't call them greenhouses unless you put a fan or a heater inside. But these covers are useful to cover plants when it's windy or when it's a little cold or chilly and they need a warmer temperature to grow. They have no power, so there's passive ventilation. You have to know how to ventilate it. Usually they have vents or windows for air movement, but under different sizes, but you have to manage them in there. Different sizes, as you can see here. This is just an example, a couple examples. If you go to the internet, you're gonna find all kind of small greenhouses that you can have in your backyard. And you can also build your own, and they sell you kits, wooden kits to build your own. And even driving around here, you can find a few in Highway 54. You can find there is a place where you can find between Vernon County, between Nevada and El Dorado Spring. There is a place where they built and make some out of wood and with some double twin panels. or you can build your own too, depending on what your resources are. More examples of high tunnels. Some of these are commercial. You can have high tunnels that are fixed to the ground. So when you practically you don't move it, or farmers or growers don't move them around. You can have small ones fixed to the ground. This in the bottom left are what we call caterpillars. You can remove them after the crop. Usually it's 2 rows in there, and they're short ones, so you can have in your backyard. But you can remove them. They're made to be moved at the end of each crop or at the end of the season. So you can move it to a different place. So you won't have looking for rotation of the crop. So you won't grow the crops in the same place all the time. Now the big ones also can be, and you can find big high tunnels that are movable, not only by removing it at the end of the season, but putting it on a skid or on rollers here, as you see in the right bottom picture, and you can move it back and forth in between 2 or 3 sections, and you cover one section, you let the other sections as a follow to recover, and you put a cover crops to improve the soil conditions, and you grow in one section, and next year you move it to the other section that already you have put a cover crops, and you have incorporated that cover crop, so it's ready to grow in a second year, and then a third one, or back to the first one. The different ways to do it on planification of how to use those movable high tunnels. They're not very common, but some growers do have them, and they're useful in many cases. Other examples of high tunnel, normally what we say high tunnels, because they don't have power, they're passively ventilated. As you see in the top picture there, they're open on the sides or on the main door on the front, so air can move inside, and so you can ventilate it, and it doesn't get very hot in there. It's gonna be always warmer inside than outside, but by ventilation, you keep the temperature in a more acceptable way. In certain cases, we're gonna talk that temperature may get there very high, but it's not gonna affect what we call vegetative growth of the plant. It may affect what we call reproductive growth. The reproductive growth is flowering and fruit set and growth of the fruit. High temperatures will affect fruit set and flowering, but it essentially does not affect much vegetative growth, the foliage development. But we're gonna go further down later on that. So high tunnels that are passively ventilated. Now, the most common way of ventilation is the side openings. But even with the side openings, we usually is more efficient when you have in this second picture in the middle, a top or roof ventilation. Normally warm air rises up. So if you don't have a roof ventilation, it's gonna hold on top of the roof in there, and it's gonna be difficult to get rid of it. But if you have a vent in the roof, in the top of the roof, that hot air will move away, and from the side, cooler air is gonna get in the high tunnel. So it's more efficient to have a top ventilation, top roof ventilation. And this big high tunnel, passive ventilation high tunnel, you see in there, this type of a structure, you have the cover on top, as you see here, but when it drops down, that area has a screen, so the hot air can escape through that screen in there. And in certain cases, that screen can be covered when it's cold. They can close it up with plastic film, so the hot air won't get out. But when it's really hot, they open it up, and the hot air will go away through this top part of the roof that is, it drops down. Yeah, normally there is side ventilation in this one. You don't see it here because they have a screen. So the screen is used mainly to avoid insect getting inside the tunnel. but air can go in and there is air movement. It warms up in there and elevates it and escapes through the roof. So that is a more efficient passive ventilation of the high tunnel. There is other type of high tunnels that I wanted to use here. The entrance of the tunnel could be a roll-up curtain. So this one on the picture on top is rolling up. It rolls up and it goes. It takes it out. There's this other one in the bottom right. It's a zipper type of close. So you zip it down and close it, and then you zip it up and move it to the side. So you open the front of the high tunnel. In this other side on the left, you can see that the doors are being built with wood. So you build a wooden door, you can open it, but it has some plastic for protection of the cold temperature. In this other picture here, you can see that this in the bottom right, you can see that in high tunnels like this one, you can grow in pots or bags as well as straight in the ground. It's up to you how you want to grow your plants. Yeah, I'm not going to talk about how to grow plants in this talk, mostly about the type of high tunnels and low tunnels and what the benefits are and certain characteristics of how to build them. But essentially, you can grow in the ground as well as in pots or bags inside. Or we're going to see some pictures. You can have tables growing the pots in the table or raised beds. So here you have kind of the same pictures, but indicates that you can grow inside in rows straight in the ground, or like you see in the back, these are bags that you're growing. The farmer is growing in those bags. They have a tarp or a ground cover in the floor, and then they put the bags on top so they can control the weeds. They don't have problem with weeds because of the ground cover, and then they grow the plants in the bag. Here we have what we call rain shelters. They're used in certain areas here in the United States as well as in tropical areas. The rain is more problematic in tropical areas than in the United States, but you do have rain in the summer, so you want to protect your plants against rain too. A lot of the Mennonites, they do grow tomatoes. They say high tunnels, but once the temperature gets into the summer and it's hot, they open the sides and they begin like this one, and they become practically rain shelters. Yeah. So rain shelters. Here, that's what we call net houses or shade houses. There's also a lot of studies and some people do use, like you see here, netting to protect the crops against insects. So they're very fine nettings. A lot of time the main problems are large insects, so they still protect the plants against small insects by other means, like if you're organic, they use predators and parasites. In certain cases, they don't want the small insects because they transmit virus, so they use very fine netting, so not even the smallest insect can get in. Of course, those nettings are pretty expensive, but in certain areas are worth it, especially when you have a high value crop. Yeah, on the top picture, you see another high tunnel or netting. Is plastic on top, but it was screens on the side. So there is ventilation, but it's also a rain shelter. Yeah. In the bottom picture on the right is a shade structure. It's only black shading cloth that you have there of different thickness. You can find shading cloths of different shading proportions. So in this case, we have several types. We were doing a study on that, but you can build your little structure or high tunnel with shading cloth to protect your plants that need a little shade. In fact, there are some tropical plants, some indoor plants that they cannot handle straight sun. So if you, for any reason, you want to bring them out, you might want to use a shade area or a shade cloth to protect them from intensive sunlight. They would not be able to handle it very well, especially when they come from inside, from indoor to the outside, they're going to be shocked by excess of sunlight. So if you would use this shading house to reduce solar radiation and also reduce the wind, it can also reduce the force of the wind, and that would be beneficial for the plant too. And so those are the benefit of using greenhouses. Reduce, stop insects, so act as an insect barrier, as well as reduce the force of the wind. So improve the growing conditions. You have also greenhouses. You can find in the internet many small backyard greenhouses like you see here. There are, in this one, doesn't have a roof ventilation, but you can add a roof ventilation, or you can find that when you buy a kit, they give you options to include in the kits. And if you put a roof ventilation, it would be much more efficient to the ventilation itself to reduce the temperature inside the greenhouse. So greenhouse, we're talking about their active environmental control. For example, you would have a fan inside to move the air. In these two, in the bottom one are more commercial ones, and usually there is these are the entrance, the main entrance, and these are closed ventilation. That's why it has a double door, because they don't let the insect going in. And here is the fan that will cool the air out. And this other picture is where the air goes in. And you see that there is a structure here where they put the netting to keep the insects out. When they push the air in, you have to use netting to keep the insects out. And not only you use this netting to keep the insects out, they usually use these panels here where water is moving through, is dripping into those panels from the top to the bottom and recollected and circulated. So the air that goes through those panels will cool down to get inside the greenhouse. That's how they keep they cool the greenhouse through air moving through these panels that are moist because of recirculating water, cools the air and gets inside the greenhouse, and as it warms up, it's pulled off by this fan out of the greenhouse. So that's the way they cool the greenhouse. And as I said, this particular one is completely enclosed, so no insects can get it. Do this very fine mesh at the entrance, at the air inlet of the greenhouse. You can have small greenhouses. These panels are kits for small greenhouses, so you can get one. Of course, it would depend how small it is and how much is your budget, how much can you afford to get one of these in your greenhouse. But all sizes, I mean, everything is possible. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about low tunnels. By going back, now we're going to talk. We talk about the different type of structure. Now we're going to go into the materials. We're going to talk a little bit about the low tunnel materials that you can use. Yeah. If you see this top picture here, that's Williamsburg, Colonial Williamsburg, what they used in the old time. These laminar pieces of wood that will construct this low tunnel that would be covered with a wax paper at that time, or a piece of a sheet, or to cover and protect the plant. So that's what it was used in the old time. Nowadays, you have hoops made out of metals. You have wire hoops, also out of metals, but finer wires. But they're very strong, though. Usually number 6 or number 9. Number 9 is the thicker one, is the one that I would recommend. But you can use also PVC. One of these one is PVC and the other one is metal, PVC or conduit. And this over here is in the left side is also wire metal, yeah, that you can use. Actually, no, those are not wire. They're thicker metals. They're bigger metals. Yeah, about that size over there. But they're metals. One of the things that I usually, you notice here, this one is crossed, and this one here is also crossed at the ends of the tunnel. Usually that gives more stability to the tunnel against wind. If you just put one like on the right side, it's less stable against wind. So I usually recommend to cross them like this one here. And you can also see here the difference between the plants that were growing under the tunnel as the ones that were not growing under tunnels. And we're going to see a few more pictures later on about that. But this is just to let you know about the structure, the hoop materials. And I want you to remember these ones, this white material. This is the row cover fabric that is porous. And this one here in the middle picture is a screen, a net that is also you can use in low tunnels to cover the plants against insects. And ways to hold them, you see bags here. We're gonna see more ways to hold the fabric to keep the tunnel in good shape. As here you see more tunnels, low tunnels with the row cover fabric or spoon bonded fabric. How do you hold these tunnels? And you saw before the bag, sandbags or rocks, pebble bags, but as well as much cheaper is when you have shovel it in to hold these tunnels much tighter than the bags. This is what I would recommend. These covers, whether you use row cover or you use the screen, they have to be very tight to the ground, so you don't have spaces where insects can get in. If there is an opening, insects are going to get in, and it's going to be much more difficult to manage those insects inside the tunnel than if they were in an open without the tunnel. So make sure you tie them up and there's no way for the insects to get in. You can use soil, bags, pins, or stones, so you can see here. On the right side, you have some pins. This is for using mainly for blankets. Here's another floating blankets that they use cinder blocks, and I have used stones also. Usually these two pictures are usually with strawberries. In strawberries, you don't need to use a tunnel, but if you can, it would be much better for the plant under a tunnel than a floating blanket. But most of the growers use a floating blanket for strawberries. So, as I mentioned before, also covering materials, wax papers and textile in the old time. The spoon bonded fabric that I was mentioned before, this is porous and there are different thicknesses. You can use it as a floating as well as a low tunnel. Different thicknesses, the thicker they are, the more protection against cold temperature. Yeah. They also cut the wind, so wind cannot go, air flow through, but it's not windy inside, and the plant is highly benefited by no wind or minimum wind. Yeah, so low tunnels and floating blankets. When you use a floating blanket, you cannot use it in any crop because the flapping, when there is wind and it flaps, it can damage the crop. So usually it's not recommended in all crops. It works well with strawberries, particularly when you're protecting the flowers. And it would be better if there is a tunnel, and because in that way, it won't touch the crop. So their porous, so air will go through, flow through. So it would get hot in the day, but at night it does not get hotter. What it does, it delays the lower temperature, but because it's porous, it will lose the temperature anyway. Increased temperature in the day, as I say, protects against cold temperature, mainly frost, not freezing. What happens when there is a frost? When there is a frost, there is water condensation in blankets. And it's the freezing of the water condensation what protects the crop and avoid the cold air to flow through. When there is a freeze, there is no condensation. So the cold, frozen air will go through and it may kill the plant. So these blankets or these tunnels are best for frost, not for freezing. But it definitely cuts the wind and reduce solar radiation because they're white, they do reflect some of the light. And their berries are as an insect. So they're very well used to extend the production season. However, those crops that need pollination by insect bees, you may want to remove these tunnels or the cover before at the flowering time, so you allow for pollination. More covering material, normally for high tunnel, you use a polyethylene film because it's a film, it's not porous. So these are used and are good in the high tunnels because they protect the plants against rain, reduce the wetness of the plant. So it's used in high tunnels with passive ventilation as well as greenhouses. There are greenhouses that are the cover is plastic, but you can have a heater or some or fans like you see here. This is a greenhouse with a plastic cover, and they have a heating and fans in there, so it becomes a greenhouse. So it's active environment control, but you use a plastic film to protect it. And on the left side is a passive ventilation. On the right side is an active ventilation. You don't see you see the fans that move the air inside, but you don't see the fans and the inlet of air on the back of the greenhouse. But they're there. These are the screens, also nets of screens. As you can see here, one of the problems with netting, it keeps the insects out, but the problem is that you can see the plant. And if you can see the plants, the insect can see the plants too. And they're gonna do their best to get to the plants. That's what I was saying. You have to have them tight to the ground so they cannot get in. Yeah. If there is an open, they're gonna get in because they see the plant and they're gonna get in. In this particular photo here is harlequin bug. They saw the plant, they cannot get in, but they're feeding through the net on those foliage that are touching the net. So even though they're not getting in, they're still feeding on that plant because they're able to see it. That does not happen when you use the row covers because the row cover does not let you or the insect see the crop. So you have to be aware of this situation if you're using nets instead of row covers. So a different mesh, as I mentioned before, the netting have different mesh. This particular mesh on the top picture is not small enough for aphids and whiteflies and thrips, but it does keep the bugs out, the harlequin bugs or any other bugs, and also keeps bees out. So if you need the bees for pollination, you need to remove this netting during pollination. Yeah, but it's also used. This is another netting here, much finer than the top one, but it's also you have to keep it very tight on the ground. And in the back, these are row covers that are being used. So this farmer, this is a garden practically, as a backyard garden. It was using all kind of protection. And you see some other tunnels in the back there. So this is a greenhouse with glass siding, but as I mentioned before, the most sophisticated have this structure in the air inlet with very fine netting to avoid the insects to get in. Yeah. So this is a more commercial type of greenhouse. Here there are some more greenhouses. You already saw this one in the bottom left, but there are some more greenhouses here. These are using the double twin panels. There are openings on top for ventilation. Although they have a active ventilation, they can use passive ventilation too when they can. Yeah, on the top here is a glass house, old-timer glass house too. This is in a research station in Mississippi. So sidewall, twin walls, for example, these two have twin walls in the bottom. The top one is a glass, one is one wall, and less efficient in keeping the temperature inside. The twin walls are the most efficient ones. But as I mentioned before, glass is rarely used nowadays. It's too expensive. The twin walls are much more efficient and easier to use. Heating and supplemental lighting in a greenhouse. This is a small greenhouse that we got. As I mentioned, you can find small greenhouses in the internet. This one was, I think, 10 or 12 by 15, something like that. It was very small, but we have some plants in there. We put a ground cover in the bottom, so you control weeds. You don't have weeds. We have tables there, raised tables, where we have pots and plants. These are actually sweet potatoes. This one in the bottom, two in pots. We installed this injector for fertilizer, for injecting fertilizers. We have a propane gas here. It was very useful. If you're gonna use a propane or natural gas heater inside a greenhouse, you wanna make sure that it's a good quality and that it has a thermostat. You don't wanna have it on all the time. Yeah, especially during the day, it's gonna get too hot. But there are some out there that have a thermostat. If you have a thermostat, you set it up at the temperature that is good for the plant, 75, or 80, yeah. And if you see here, you have a fan that it should also be set to a thermostat. So when the temperature gets 85 or 90 degrees, the fan will start to pull the air out. But at that temperature, the heater will already be shut down. So in the day, it heats up because of the solar radiation, but when it gets too hot, the fan is activated and will pull the hot air out. There are some old-time lamps for supplemental light. This is important in the winter. If you want to grow your plants in the winter, the solar radiation is too low in the winter because the sun is lower and the days are much shorter. So a lot of growers, and if you want to keep tropical plants, you might want to have supplemental light. These are all type lights. They're not good for greenhouses anymore because now we have the LED lights that are much cheaper. Not only the fixtures, but also the electricity that they use. They're much more efficient. And you can see here a couple pictures of hydroponic that you can grow in these particular greenhouses. You can grow hydroponic in these greenhouses or in high tunnels. And you can see white lights in this picture in the bottom, as well as this pink light. This pink light is actually a combination of blue and red light, which is more efficient for vegetative growth. Yeah, you can grow for food too, but usually fooding requires some of the other light spectrum, and for fooding it's more recommended a mixture of a white light with supplemental red and blue, yeah, to increase. What happens is photosynthesis does not need the other spectrum. It only needs red and blue. I repeat, for photosynthesis, you only need red and blue. The other light spectrums are necessary for other physiological activities, which are minor in the plant. That's why you need some white lights, but photosynthesis is mainly red and blue. And that's why for vegetative growth, we're using this pink or a combination of red and blue light. Okay. I show this is a bigger greenhouse. So you see the heaters here with airflow combination. So these heaters blow the air into this section here, and there is another fan here that blows the hot air. Oops. The hot air. I'm looking at the top picture. The hot air through this tubing, plastic tubing there, which has holes. So the holes release the hot air down to the plants in the greenhouse here throughout. I mean, all the length of the greenhouse. So there is very efficient way of recirculating the air, the hot air, and that's how they keep the greenhouse warm. I mentioned before about the inlet. This is the air inlet during the summer. These are the panels that are moist, so there's recirculating water in this panel. I'm talking about the picture on the left. So these panels are wet. The air goes through in and cools down in the summers to keep the temperature inside cooler than outside. And this on the outside on the inlet where the screen is to keep the insects out. And the panels are in this section here. So the control environment and very fine nets to keep all the insects out, especially the small ones that are the ones that transmit viruses. Yeah. And when you have tomatoes, you don't want thrips or whiteflies or aphids inside because they all transmit viruses. And here in Missouri, the main problems are with thrips. There is plenty of tomato spotted wilt virus, which is transmitted by thrips. And you can see here a very sophisticated greenhouse in Arizona. This is a large one. This whole greenhouse here is about 50 acres, and they have several of them. They have I don't know, probably close to 1,000 acres in the glass house or greenhouses here. And if you see here, the people that go in, the group that we were moving, we have to use hair cover as well as cover our shoes not to get diseases or problems inside the greenhouse. So they're very sophisticated, they're very clean, they spend a lot of money in keeping clean, free of diseases and free of insects. These are the tomatoes that you can find year-round in your supermarket. Those tomatoes that are packaged in plastic. They're not very large, but they're good size, and they're in plastic. And you can find them year-round. This is a look inside. The left picture is a look in the inside of that greenhouse that I showed you in the previous slides, and that's how they're growing it. The right one is another greenhouse of a smaller grower, small growing. It's just one bay where he's growing tomatoes hydroponically. These other ones are also hydroponically in these bags here. These are bags. These are pots with perlite. So when it's hydroponic production, you're feeding all the nutrients through the irrigation system in the water. There is nothing in the soil. The soil on those bags are inert. They don't have any food, any nutrients. All is fed through the irrigation. And this is an example of indoor production. And you can see these are more study or research type warehouses where they're experimenting with different types of structures and light. But that is in the bottom picture. In the left picture is a commercial, it's a company that sells this structure for commercial growers. So this is a demonstration side. This was actually in Las Vegas, where there was this company selling these structures. So you see the structure, they have lights in each section, and they have trays growing plants. These trays are floating in water. So they have the tray and they have water inside. Another way of hydroponic production, not necessarily without any inner substrate, is all on water. So this is another way of producing small plants, but it's hydroponic. Benefit of protected culture. A few more slides and we're gonna finish, but these are the benefits. I showed you before some of these one. This on top is strawberries, and you see the thick blanket, floating blanket here is already been removed. It did snow, so they remove it, and you see the difference in the plants under the blanket. They're still green, but the ones outside where they had snow and very cold temperatures, the plant is not dead, but all the foliage is dead. So which one do you think is gonna come up better in the spring? It's gonna be a strong growth in the spring. Of course, those ones that still have foliage are gonna grow faster and stronger to produce more fruits early in the season than these ones that they have to produce foliage first, waste a lot of energy in producing new foliage, and then with that foliage start to produce flowers and fruit. So the fruiting is going to be delayed and likely is going to be less productive than the ones that have been protected. The other thing is you protect, these are strawberry flowers at the bottom. You protect the flowers with the blankets. The plant can handle very cold temperatures, they're very hardy, but the flower is not. Strawberry flowers at 32 degrees will die, like you see here. You see this dark center. The petal is still alive, but the center where the fruit is dead. It's already dead. That's a very sensitive area, and they cannot handle below 32 degrees. So you growers use blanket to protect when there is a freeze or a frost to avoid dead flowers. Yeah, all these flowers, this one is dead too, see, it's black. If it were alive, it would be yellow. It would be nice yellow. These are black, they're dead. And you see here cole crops also, the difference in the growth that were under the cover in comparison to the ones outside. So even the cole crops can handle cold temperature, but if you give them a better conditions, a little warmer temperature, they will grow faster and larger. Yeah. The other thing that I want to let you know, one of the main things that we think that protected culture and high tolerance is protecting against cold temperature. But I mentioned before, it's not just cold temperature. It protects against wind. It reduces solar radiation, so you don't have intensive solar radiation. And it also affects somehow humidity or relative humidity, but that is a little more debatable. But essentially what it does is when you manage these four factors, temperature, wind, solar radiation, and relative humidity, those are the 4 factors that affect evapotranspiration. So when you use low tunnels, and I measure very high temperatures under the low tunnel late in the spring and in the summer, but even though it's high temperature, because you reduce wind and reduce solar radiation, the overall evapotranspiration is reduced inside the tunnels. And that's what it makes the plant feel more comfortable. Even at higher temperature, the plant feels more comfortable, grow larger and faster inside the tunnel, whether it's a low tunnel or a high tunnel, the same thing. The cover is protecting against these things, low temperature, so increases temperature, it cuts the wind, reduces solar radiation, and therefore reduces evapotranspiration, benefiting the growth. Even in the summer, these cucumbers here were grown in the summer, and they were covered. Temperatures were pretty high inside. We have to remove it by the time of pollination to set fruit. Remember that cucumber needs cross-pollination. So they were removed. And in this case, it protects against insects. This, in the right picture, you see the plants in between. They were covered with worms. The worms kind of completely chewed them up, but they did not get inside under the tunnel, so they did not kill the tunnel. This other one here was sprayed with a BT type of insecticide, so we were able to get rid of the worm in that one. But we didn't spray these ones here, so the worms eat them up completely, practically completely. And that made a big difference in the yield production. Yeah, same here. You have the cover and the non-cover that were sprayed with a BT, and there was a big difference in production. You have a higher production on those that were under the cover in the initial 4 weeks, and then you open it up for cross-pollination. So larger plants set and sustain more fruit and increase yield, the ones that were under the cover. Protects against melonworm and other insects. You can use, as I mentioned before, hydroponic tomatoes and cucumber in greenhouses. Yeah, you can see them here. You saw them before. And the last thing that I'm going to mention, we did this study here in Missouri. We grew watermelons under this high tunnel. This is a caterpillar high tunnel, so you can remove it at the end of the season every year and move it elsewhere. This section here, we're under low tunnel, but we already removed the low tunnels, so you don't see it in there. But because of the low tunnel, the plants are much larger than this one here that were with no cover. So they were exposed to wind and cold temperatures. So you see the big difference, which meant an initial harvest, pollination and harvest in the high tunnels, then became the ones that were covered, were in the low tunnels, and lastly, the ones that were not covered. We did this study 2 years, and we were looking if we can harvest before the 4th of July. And actually, we were able to harvest from the high tunnel and from the low tunnel the week before the 4th of July, actually under the high tunnel 2 weeks before the 4th of July, and the ones under the low tunnel, we were able to harvest 1 week before the 4th of July. And with this, we can conclude that protected production system or protected culture effectively protect against abiotic or environmental stresses, biotics, insects, and some viral diseases. It can extend the production season and year-round production of vegetable crops, increase the crop growth, yield, and quality. And here, if you have questions, but I also have some publication from the University of Missouri that we have. You can write that down, and you can search in publications, MU Extension publication, and find those publications if you want to grow inside high tunnels. And actually, that study on watermelon production for the 4th of July is published in there too. This is the MPG, the Missouri Produce Growers Bulletin. Yeah, and the other ones are publication M170 and M173. So if you have any question.
Thank you, Ramon. Yeah, there are a couple questions in the chat.
Where's the chat?
One question was, does enough of the red and blue light spectrums get through the netting and blankets to promote the vegetative growth? or should the insulating blankets be removed during the day?
I would say through nettings, yes. Through the white row cover, you will lose quite a bit of light in there. I would say if you're using row covers, it might be better to uh, have it inside. But I would not recommend use those lights out in the outside where the rain can get them. With low tunnels, no, don't use it. Use it inside a high tunnel, not in the low tunnels. Because rain, they're electric. I mean, you will have to protect against the rain. You don't want to put them outside. In addition, it might be too expensive for low tunnels. But in the greenhouses or high tunnels, yes, you can use them inside. It's much better. If you are in a high tunnel or in a greenhouse, you don't need to use the netting. Well, netting you might, but not the row cover.
Did that
What
answer
other
your question,
questions?
Kiss? Okay. Chris said, I meant the red and blue from the sun getting through the row cover.
Which that can you repeat? I meant, oh,
Do you see it, Ramon?
yeah, they do. They do go through the row cover. The thing is, the row cover will reflect some of it, but the light from the sun is so intensive that it's okay. In fact, most of the broadleaf plants, full sunlight is excessive, and it happens what we call photosaturation, which results in photorespiration. So excessive sunlight is not good for the plant. There are crops like corn, for example, that they need all the light they want because they have a different physiology in the photosynthesis physiology. Broadleaf plants, the photosynthesis physiology is different than corn. The full solar radiation is excessive and it will produce photorespiration. So if you cover, that's why using row cover is beneficial to the plant. A 30% solar radiation reduction, even shade houses, no more than 30%, up to 30% is more beneficial to the plant than full sun. So even though it will reflect some of the blue and the red, it's still enough there to get for the plant to grow.
Great, thanks, Ramon. I think you got that answered for him. And then Ramon, is it okay if I send out these slides to them later?
Yeah, I'll send you
Okay,
a PDF with them and they can have it.
perfect. Okay, perfect. So we'll send out the slides. And then there was another question. Do you recommend a particular direction and location to place the tunnel? Can you mention a few plants that don't grow well in tunnels?
The plants that won't grow well usually are the cool season plants that you want to grow in the middle of the summer. They might not grow well because it gets a little hot. Yeah, I mean, for example, if you grow Brussels sprout in the late spring, they get to the summer, it's too hot, and the quality of the sprouts would be very bad, would be very soft. Other plants might get bitter and take excess of heat. For example, lettuce, if they bolt, they're gonna get bitter. They have too much heat. Let's see. I kind of lost the question. Where was the question? Oh, the place
Oh,
of the tunnel.
yeah.
The place of the tunnel, any tunnel or greenhouse, is depending where you are. But if you get the chance to do the tunnel south-north, so you can have sunlight on one side in the morning and on the other side in the evening, that's the best recommendation, to put the tunnel south-north. But when you are very way up north and the sun is kind of low in the horizon, it might be better to do it in the east-west. But here in Missouri, if you're going to concentrate your crop only in the winter, yeah, you can use it east-west. But if you're going to use the tunnel all year round, winter and summer, is better north-south, and you're going to have light on both sides every time. Any other question? Did I answer the question okay?
Yep. I think you answered that one. She just responded. Another one was, do you know of any resources to help fund the costs for any of these options?
If you are a commercial grower, the USDA has a program to match certain funds. So they can provide funds, and you have to match. You will have to find out with them, but you have to be commercial grower for that. If you're not commercial grower, I don't know any funding that will help you. Any other question? Okay. Well, if you have any question, direct an email to Sarah, and Sarah will direct it to me. Or you have my email at the beginning. The first picture is in there. So when you get the